Others opposed?
Mr. Chair and members, Bob Ackerman on behalf of the California Nevada Beverage Association, the major soft drink non-alcoholic beverage producers. We're on the PET side of this, endorse Mr. Robeson's comments regard to the program. This is tweaking one element and not a complete reform of the program. We believe that's the appropriate process to use and not to remove an incentive, which is incentivize the recycling rates, where we're rewarded as the recycling rates have increased. Now we're switching out that and saying now the incentive is to use recycled content. From the soft drink perspective with PET, we use a lot of preforms that are basically brought in from out of state, and those are blown into bottles. So you get a preform. Tracking that recycled content rate enforcement is a real problem since we're sourcing those preforms from outside of California. And as I said, you're switching the incentives now, penalizing us for a good recycling rate, which is what the program is all about, to keep those products out of landfill, which the program has accomplished, very laudable in terms of those recycling rates. And now we're going to incentivize something else to the detriment of other reclaimers and recyclers who are using these recycled PET for other types of containers, clamshell containers, other types of recycled products. So this is a moment in time where people are concerned with pricing of a commodity that does vary, that 6 months from now could be very different. And unfortunately, we're going to try and deal with this problem at this point in time, which we don't think is fair to the program or to the industry or other recyclers. So with that, we're opposed. Thank you.
My name is Patty Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the Plastic Recycling Corporation of California. I am opposed. I feel that the market is for PET. We buy and sell over 130 million pounds of PET every year. The market is not broken. The demand for the PET bottles far exceeds the supply and has for some number of years. Yes, the prices are down. We believe they've hit bottom, but have rebound somewhat. And while this bill would help a few reclaimers in state, no question about it, it would hurt many more because it would drive up the cost of feedstock. And so it would hurt those reclaimers who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into converting PET into things that are not bottles, including and things that are displacing virgin but they aren't bottles. So for example, carpet, clothing, packaging, things like that. PET goes into all of these different products. I think that what I find frustrating is that California already has a recycled content legislation on the books. The RPPC law, the rigid plastic packaging container law. That law is underfunded and not being well utilized. It could really help right now with this downturn if it was strategically enforced, but it's not. It's not being enforced, and that's a little frustrating. So now we're going to layer something else on top of something we already have. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. We also have another law or another program, the Plastic Market Development Payment Program, that is out of the unredeemed deposit funds, and that is in existence today. That it could also help with these guys. I supplied them a lot of material, all these 10 people that were, if that was strategically used, right now that is not being administered properly. In fact, it's being administered in a way that is actually against what is written in the law originally. So it's really, I think we could help them, but we don't have to do it in this slam bam way that is going to do more damage than good. Lastly, we implemented that processing fee offsets for a reason. Back, I think it was 2003, if I recall. I can't recall, but the reason that we did the offsets was because prior to that, the beverage industry had a situation where when recycling was lower, their costs were lower. And what we were trying to do with the processing fee offset is change that around so that when recycling was higher, the beverage industry's costs were lower. This is called good government. And it worked. And it drove the recycling rate up very high, and it's because of the efforts and works, not entirely, there was other things, there are always other things, but because we really worked hard to get that recycling rate up. So I'm happy to work with you to try to come up with some solutions that can help these recyclers stay in the state, continue to recycle. It's very important to PRCC. We have spent millions of dollars as an organization to make sure that there are reclaimers in the state of California to handle the PET, and we would like to work with you to fix that, but we do not think this is the way to do it. So we oppose.
Thank you.
Chairman and members, Kelly Jensen representing Anheuser-Busch InBev. We are opposed to the bill as well. As you know, our consumers pay into the CRV program every day with their purchases, and the company pays with their processing fee offset. And we're confused a little bit by the bill, mainly because you would think we would use a carrot in this circumstance as opposed to a stick by trying to incentivize the industry to use more of this product. And we're happy to discuss that. I think one thing we're confused about is the term every beverage manufacturer. Does that mean we're including our friends in the wine industry and in the spirits industry that are not currently in the program? And then in that scenario, if they are included in the mandate, there's no penalty because they don't pay a processing fee. So these are issues that, if they're not in the bill, then you have to ask why. So these are issues that we will continue to ask as we move forward.
Others opposed to SB 732 by PAN?
Mr. Chair, members, Tim Shestak with the American Chemistry Council for the reasons stated. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, Joe Ackler on behalf of SPI, the Plastics Industry Trade Association. One of all the same issues we agree with for the opposition. There's also another issue, and that is that food and beverage safety. Food and beverage containers are in the plastic area are regulated by the U.S. FDA, and this bill could be in conflict with those regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Ryan Modlin, Owens, Illinois. On behalf of the 1,000 employees that we have in 3 plants in California, we have to oppose the bill.
Thank you. Okay. Members, questions of the authors. Senator Jackson.
Yes, I'm really in a quandary here. A lot of my friends are in support, and I find that there's some compelling opposition here. We know the bill's going to cost a lot of money and will not likely incentivize recycling. Both Cal Recycle, which is an agency I think that's done a fairly good job, and the state auditor have called for the elimination of processing fee offsets as the best way to make the bottle bill program sustainable and to increase recycling by essentially making manufacturers feel the full cost of using materials that are not readily recyclable. So I'm wondering if you could explain why you're proposing to do essentially, as I understand, exactly the opposite of what these, and I consider them experts, have advised.
Mr. Chair, members, again, Mark Murray with Californians Against Waste. As you may recall, Cal Recycle proposed eliminating 100% elimination of processing fee offsets last year in the governor's budget. That proposal did not move forward because everyone in this room, myself included, all the folks that are opposed, all the folks that are in support, opposed the governor's proposal. So the idea of elimination, complete 100% elimination of processing fee offset was rejected by you, the legislature, and by the other stakeholders. This represents, I would argue that this represents a half loaf. This is saying, let's continue the processing fee offset concept, I would argue, as a carrot for California manufacturers that are meeting the existing minimum recycled content requirement for glass containers. But if out-of-state manufacturers, if manufacturers in Mexico and Oklahoma are not meeting the same minimum recycled content, then they should not be eligible for the processing fee offset. If you're an in-state California glass manufacturer, this law doesn't change anything. You continue to receive the beverages that you sell in the marketplace, continue to receive the same processing fee offset. The only change is if I'm an out-of-state manufacturer and I'm not meeting the minimum recycled content requirement that's been the law in California for years. Again, my reading of the tea leaves is that there was no stomach in the legislature for eliminating the processing fee offsets and making all of the manufacturers, in-state and out-of-state, pay $60 million more per year in processing fees. I may be wrong, but that's what happened last year. This is a way of potentially reducing that, meeting Cal Recycle a third of the way down the road, literally a third of the way in terms of the financial impact.
To follow up on Senator Jackson's question, if we're already at a structural deficit, notwithstanding each of our collective stomachs here to address the problem, we have a structural deficit of $70 billion or million, not that big. And then this is another program. This is going to cost something for Cal Recycle to implement it. So it seems as though at a base level, it's going to aggravate the already structural deficit that we have. Now, we may not have taken any action last year, but it's up for debate. I mean, this is not a free program.
No, it's an excellent question, but just to clarify that this will help the structural deficit. The reason that these folks are opposing this proposal is because they're going to have to pay processing fees that they have. The out-of-state manufacturers potentially are going to have to pay processing fees they haven't previously had to pay. The structural deficit, the reason Cal Recycle wanted to eliminate processing fee offset completely is because they want these manufacturers to pay that cost of recycling. What we're saying is let's create a line. If you're a manufacturer that's meeting the existing California minimum recycled content requirement, you'll still receive this financial benefit. If you're not meeting it, you're going to have to pay into the program, and that will save the program money. So we think that let's say that most of the out-of-state manufacturers can't meet this requirement, so about a third of the $60 million that's currently being used to offset the cost of recycling, that Cal Recycle wanted to eliminate completely, we'll reduce that. We'll save about $20 million a year. So that's what this proposal would do relative to the structural deficit. It improves the situation.
Mr. Robeson, you have a comment.
Well, if I can, I want to clarify something. Californians Against Waste is right. Up to a point, he's underselling it. This is for glass. It'll be a 100% elimination of the processing fee offset. I mean, it's the beverage manufacturer is the one getting the offset. So our customer gets it. And if the plants that are supplying beer bottles, because that's what we're talking about is beer bottles, because that's what's in the program. If they don't meet the minimum content standard, the beverage manufacturer doesn't get the processing fee offset, and which is somehow it's passed on to us. But it just won't be met. There's not enough material in the marketplace to meet the standard, and just not enough. The Glass Packaging Institute is in other states lobbying for bottle bills. We want bottle bills. We want beverage recycling programs to work, and we lobby for them, and we're part of initiatives to pass them. They're not. We're a unique state, and the cullet supply is not there to meet the standard. And this bill essentially serves as a backdoor way to take our processing fee offset away, making our product uncompetitive.
Senator Jackson, it was your question. I don't know if you have a follow-up.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, I understand both sides of this, but we do have, we do have concerns about being able to maintain the program and keep it sustainable. So I'm trying to, and I think it's been a very successful program. On the other hand, I also think that manufacturers need to take some responsibility for the cost of their materials. So I'm kind of torn as to, both sides have some compelling arguments. I'm just torn here because I'm curious that Cal Recycle calls for an end to this. Now, granted, last year we didn't have the will, and what I hear you saying, this is to sort of like the Energizer Bunny that gets bumped, it can't go in one direction, so it's turning around trying to go in another direction. Whether that's really the right direction, and I'm still unsure. I understand it, and it makes sense. On the other hand, the arguments on the other side make some sense too. To me, then it's got to be a net gain to the state and to the recycling program. So would this be a net gain? I mean, you talk about you get a third more, or would we lose the benefits of the program?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that this is a net gain. This doesn't go as far as CalRecycle was proposing to go. CalRecycle doesn't have a proposal out there. This is the only vehicle in the state Senate to address any of these problems. Just to be clear, the in-state glass manufacturer are meeting the existing minimum recycled content. In fact, as they've noted themselves, and we agree, they're far exceeding the 35% minimum recycled content requirements. So this would not change for them. They're going to be okay. Out-of-state manufacturers, out-of-country manufacturers that are not meeting the 35% would now have to pay a processing fee. That's what's going to, on the glass side, that's what's going to reduce that processing fee offset. So again, that's the let's call it a third of a loaf solution. I think there were a lot of great suggestions coming from the PRCC, the Plastic Recycling Corporation of California. We'd like to try and incorporate some of those ideas into this in terms of trying to help on the PET side. So 2 different materials, 2 different sets of problems. Again, I think there's a lot of good ideas there. This is the vehicle in the Senate. This is the only vehicle in the Senate for addressing any of those problems.
I guess the concern is that there's the cost of that enforcement to go and find these out-of-state manufacturers is high. Is high.
With respectfully, I don't think that it's a high cost. When you look at what's happening right now, we have a minimum recycled content law in place right now for glass containers, for fiberglass containers. The fiberglass is on any fiberglass that's sold in California, regardless of where it's produced. Not a significant administrative or enforcement cost there. We have minimum recycled content requirements for newsprint. Any newsprint that's sold in the state of California has to meet a California minimum recycled newsprint. So they've got, 1 PY at CalRecycle that is implementing the newsprint minimum recycled content law. They've got a PY that they split that is working on the glass and fiberglass minimum recycled content. So the opportunity is to save potentially $20 million a year in processing fee offsets. Some amount of that would potentially go to enforcement of the program, but it's $20 million of savings for processing fee offsets because, and again, the reason the out-of-state manufacturers are opposing this legislation is because they would have to pay that $20 million.
Senator Leno.
Mr. Murray, I follow everything you said, and I understand also the benefit to the program and who's going to make that benefit. Do you agree with Mr. Robeson that the manufacturers of the glass bottles want to use more recycled material, but they just can't access it? You say our in-state folks can access it and are exceeding the 35%, and Ms. Robeson saying the out-of-state manufacturers want to, but they can't because they can't access the recycled materials.
Absolutely, with one slight modification.
Okay, go ahead.
They're not willing to pay the cost of recycling those glass containers to get them back. So the reason we have a processing fee offset, the reason we have a structural deficit at $50 million is the net cost that is of recycling glass in this state is because the glass manufacturers are not willing to cover that cost in the scrap value that they pay for that material. So we collect it, we process it, and we deliver that glass back to the glass manufacturers. They will use as much as we will give them. They will not pay the cost of recycling it.
And the difference between the in-state and the out-of-state is, in your opinion, because?
We have a great bottle bill program. We do a fabulous job of collecting this material for recycling, and we have this processing payment structure where we pay recyclers that net cost of recycling. In the old days, we used to make the glass manufacturers pay that, but over time, we've created this offset where the fund is now paying it. And as we've been talking about, we can't afford to do that anymore. So this is a way of asking at least some manufacturers, those manufacturers that are out of the state of California but are selling their beer, and if there's any other container in glass that's a beverage in California, we're asking them to at least cover the net cost of recycling those containers. That's what this bill would do.
There seems to be a response here.
Well, I mean,
through the chair,
if I can, it's Okay, just for what it's worth, the out-of-state manufacturers and the in-state manufacturers are all the same manufacturers. So in the end, the money's coming out of the same company, and it is a limited supply of quality cullet. And I know Ms. Kepke can talk to this better than me because she her client controls the limited supply. So if it's a limited supply, and whether it's in California or trucked to Oklahoma, it's still a limited supply, and it's gonna all come from California mostly. It's not coming from these non-bottle bill states. It'll get shipped to Oklahoma or to Oregon or to Colorado, not Oregon because Oregon is a bottle bill state, or Colorado, and it'll and that'll cost money, and just the increased demand alone. I mean, it's a supply and demand argument that it's going to be expensive, and our product is competing against container types that are cheaper. And so, we can do this. It may not improve the glass recycling program, though. It might just eliminate glass as a product type, and maybe that's the goal. I don't.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Dawn Kepke on behalf of Strategic Materials, again, one of the largest glass processors here in California and in the nation. And one thing with regard to the California market, Strategic is shipping 18% of its cullet out of state, out of country every year. So to suggest that there isn't additional cullet that can be utilized, that from our perspective is not the case. With regard to other out-of-state operations and manufacturers, it is our understanding, based on the operations that we have in the rest of the country that supply to these manufacturers, that they do have already some level of post-consumer content in many of those locations. It ranges depending on location. For example, Mexico, which is one of the customers we supply, as we understand it, they're at about 30%. So that's a manufacturing operation that arguably could get to 35%. Other places range between 10 and 15, upwards of 60% recycled content. So, and again, that's based on what we supply. So to suggest that it's not doable, that this is really a high bar from our perspective, we think that there is supply out there. As far as working here in state to clean up the loads and what we're taking out of MRF operations and out of landfills. I had the sergeant hand you a two-page document that does show that the material we receive is incredibly dirty that's coming from the MRFs. With respect to cleaning that material, though, I would submit to you that CalRecycle already has regulations in place that require MRFs to provide that material with only a 10% residual. We are concerned about that. Clearly, that illustrates that they're not meeting that requirement. We're working with CalRecycle on enforcement of that to help clean up those loads. Additionally, we're working with individual MRF operations as well to help better clean that material, as well as to incorporate additional screens to capture more of the fines that slip through as part of that process, or the process that they go through. So we are capturing more glass as we work with the MRFs to do so. But in terms of the material that's turned around, that really dirty material is provided to us, but that is exactly the job that we do. So to suggest that the quality is inferior or not at the level that manufacturers require, from our perspective, is not the case. We take that material, we run it through operations multiple times in some regard. And the second page you'll note is a picture of the type of cullet that we provide to the manufacturers. If we didn't provide a set of material that met the manufacturer's standards, exactly for the reasons stated around challenges with kind of their furnaces and needing to ensure that there's not a lot of residuals, ceramics, fiber, and so on, they wouldn't be even higher than the 35% requirement today, into close to 50. So we would submit that this is workable. Thank you.